In a world facing unprecedented challenges, where the forces of nature and human intervention have begun to collide, our story begins. Welcome to a world transformed by climate change, a world where extreme weather events have become our new reality. Extreme weather events, crumbling infrastructure, and forced climate migrations are reshaping our planet. But how did we get here? The climate crisis is fueled by a complex web of factors. The fossil fuel industry, our reliance on cars, and unsustainable farming practices are just a few of the culprits. But there's hope on the horizon. Advances in technology are paving the way for change. We're transitioning to a world where fusion energy, green urban planning, and smart technology could be our tools for climate adaptation. Governments, experts, and local citizens are coming together to create policies and strategies for climate adaptation. We are going to discuss just some of the scenarios we could face globally as a result of climate change, investigating new technologies, governance structures, and how humans all will play a role in our upcoming adaptations. Even with progress, we're faced with contradictions that challenge our path to a sustainable future. We currently invest a vast amount of money on clean energy subsidies, but we invest just as much, if not more, into the oil industry. According to the Senate Budget Committee, US taxpayers pay approximately $20 billion every year to the fossil fuel industry, while Reuters reports that renewable energy subsidies are at approximately $15.6 billion. This contradiction poses a serious issue that experts see as a major roadblock for the future. We spoke with Dr. Jacob Weger, political ecologist at Seton Hall University, who has studied climate adaptation.
Long term, we absolutely need to move away from fossil fuel use, right? And that in order to rein in climate change to the point where we've agreed to the Paris Climate Accords, no more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial warming, ideally within 1.5 degrees Celsius, net zero emissions by 2050. In order for that to happen, we can't just burn up all the fossil fuels that we have, right? We're actually going to have to leave them in the ground.
Currently, our society is entirely reliant on fossil fuels. There is nothing you can experience or consume that cannot be traced back to fossil fuels in some fashion. The question then becomes how we create a balance between ensuring a functioning society and a transition to cleaner energy.
Granted, right? There are trade-offs, as we were talking about before. Right? There are trade-offs for all of these things. People don't want to. Right? People still have to drive to work and get their kids to school and all of that, and people need to be able to afford to put dinner on the table and all that. So certainly, politicians are trying to balance these competing priorities. I think that one of the directions it needs to go in is that we need to find active roles for the fossil fuel industry in the green transition.
Right now, we have some clean energy alternatives such as solar and wind. However, these are expensive to develop and install and hold their own downsides.
Well, one of the needs anyway for utilizing renewable energy, getting it into the grid in an effective way, is more storage capacity, right? Especially because solar energy is only available when the sun is shining, right? So you need to find ways to access it and use it at other times.
Solar energy can prove a new type of waste as people in the future begin to replace degraded panels. Solar panels do contain harmful chemicals that, if disposed of improperly, could prove harmful to habitats and local environments. Another key issue we've seen is the cost of developing these projects. Most renewable energy projects are costly due to the material and high labor. Most large-scale projects require some form of tax break or subsidies from governments. When they don't receive them, the projects have a high chance of being cancelled. Just this year, we saw Ørsted, a Danish energy developer, cancel 2 key wind farm projects off the coast of the Jersey Shore. The Associated Press quoted the company's CEO Mads Nipper stated, "No significant adverse developments from supply chain challenges leading to delays in the project schedule and rising interest rates have led us to this decision of cancelling the project." The project had received a $1 million tax break from the New Jersey state government, but the company stated it would need more in order to complete the project. As economic conditions change, we could see a slower development of clean energy projects. This would spell bad news for the global community as climate change is not waiting for the change in economic cycles. Currently, we are seeing cities act in developing new, green, urban planning initiatives. Singapore has been making significant strides in developing itself into a greener city. This includes more green spaces, smarter city planning, and greener materials. The New York Times reports that Singapore has looked to implement new developments in city planning to fight the issues urban areas present, such as urban canyons, where skyscrapers limit airflow and trap pockets of heat. This includes strategically placing buildings in certain areas to promote better circulation, integrating green spaces, and more. However, as we look to develop new spaces globally, there is a new key consideration: sustainability. Not every strategy will work in every region. It is on the region to rely on what Dr. Weger calls folk wisdom. It is the use of an old understanding of the local environment and ecosystem that will play a vital role in adapting to climate change.
Something that you alluded to in one of our emails as well was, there are attempts in places like around urban planning, for example, to sort of, integrate nature back into urban areas, things like that, and also incorporate more building designs that are more energy efficient. Oftentimes, what we're finding is that if we turn back to old forms of wisdom, right, that people around the world are practicing, there's a lot of wisdom in sort of like vernacular architectural designs, where people in tropical places, or people in the desert regions, people in very rainy, wet regions, historically had building designs that were much more adapted to those local environments, right, and those local climates. And I think what we need to do is start to search for some more of those local lessons and those kinds of folk wisdom in things like building design and urban planning, things like farming methods. Right, there's a lot of land uses that could be much more sustainable, have much lower carbon footprint. These kinds of things. I think that's one thing.
However, to stop it in its tracks, we will need the technology of the future. For the first time in history, there have been significant leaps in the development of the holy grail of energy: fusion. Usually a reaction, only found in the sun, it is when a chemical reaction creates more energy than it uses. As stated by Forbes magazine, realization has been nearly impossible. However, December 2022 saw a breakthrough after more energy was released than used in creating a reaction, with it now being repeated this past July, targeting 2 lasers to fuse 2 atoms together, releasing a high energy output. While all of these breakthroughs are extremely promising, all of them are just fringe signals to what could be possible. There are a lot of hurdles fusion energy must overcome for it to end up in the future home. First is cost, as we saw with the issues in current renewables. The cost of energies will have to compete with the cost of fossil fuel.
I think that one of the directions it needs to go in is that we need to find active roles for the fossil fuel industry in the green transition. Okay. So we need to find ways that to basically incentivize the fossil fuel companies to make major shifts, so they're not just faced with losing a bunch of money and potentially having these industries collapse. These are really powerful vested interests. We've seen just how deeply their interests are vested in maintaining their business model, because for a long time, they were trying to undermine any kind of progress on climate mitigation. So I think what we need to do is bring them into the fold. We need to find ways in which they themselves can adapt to renewable energy.
However, scalability proves to be just as big, if not more, of a challenge. Both successful reactions were completed in massive scientific facilities. In order for this to be done on a wider scale, it will need to be done on a smaller scale for any hopes of commercial use. While we need science to help develop the future technologies to help us adapt, the government plays a pivotal role in climate adaptation implementation. From international climate summits to local community initiatives, we see a mosaic of actions. However, it will take strong strategic implementation to see these new technologies take hold. One example of where this is occurring is Vietnam. The nation's journey towards a sustainable future is taking hold in the Mekong Delta. Dr. Weger conducted research in the region to look at how knowledge passes through the government.
And one of the things that's true is that we're going to have to learn from each other.
Yeah.
And from each other, I mean just like me and you, right? But also like society to society. We're all facing a relatively similar set of issues with climate change and responding to it in very different ways. And we have to start learning about, so we can improve our responses.
Now, it is important to make differentiation between governmental systems, which Weger does.
Sometimes democracy is a very slow machine, and more authoritarian societies can decide what their priorities are. So, for example, Vietnam, China as well, they've as a nation they've recognized that a lot needs to be done to both mitigate and adapt to climate change, and the government is taking the lead on that. However, what that means is that local voices and local nuance end up getting left out. And so there's oftentimes policies that are implemented from above that end up tending to benefit those at the top, their own agendas, their own policy priorities, their own development goals, without really taking into consideration local needs and preferences.
Right.
And oftentimes then the benefits themselves don't actually reach the intended beneficiaries or the most vulnerable populations that
Right.
need them. Yeah. So I mean, it's difficult to compare. There's pros and cons when
Right.
it comes to implementing these kinds of needed policies right now. I think that I would take democracy any day, right? but there's still a lot of complexity that comes with that.
What does this all mean? The challenges are clear. Climate change is upon us, leading to adverse weather, crumbling infrastructure, and shrinking livable spaces. Let's consider the what-if scenarios. While there are an infinite number of possibilities as to where the climate crisis could take us, we've seen three overarching possibilities. The first is a total and utter failure. This is if no action is taken to help mitigate or adapt to the climate crisis. Habitats and ecosystems across the world will be decimated, but on top of that, many key population centers will become uninhabitable, whether that is due to increased temperatures, floods, or more. Our world and demographics will fundamentally change. Major East Coast cities like Manhattan will be flooded. Population displacement would be at all-time highs. What would contribute to this? A lack of green urban development, a continuous reliance on fossil fuels, and a lack of consciousness by society. Here we see some mild progress globally, but geopolitical tensions result in continued fossil fuel usage. This results in a slow degradation of infrastructure over the next decade that only continues to damage our planet. However, there is some hope. The best-case scenario, we see a total implementation and buy from all nations. We see a move towards sustainable green energy alternatives. We see a slew of new technologies take hold, from fusion energy to carbon capture, to help fight climate change. Green urban development grows at a rapid rate. Weather events and patterns begin to normalize, and ecosystems begin to redevelop. In conclusion, the climate challenge is complex, but we can adapt, prepare, and build a resilient future. Our journey continues as we strive for a world where knowledge, resilience, and understanding light the way forward. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of climate, energy, and our collective future.